Hello, my astrology friends. This is Lada from AstroLada.com. And today, my guest is financial astrologer Sama. Hello, Sama.
Hello, Lada. Hello, everyone. Hope you all are doing well. It's fun to be back to talk about the markets. Like I said earlier, the last time I was on, there's going to be a lot of volatility, a lot of ups and downs to be adjusted to. We gave the analogy of things being like a wave, right? And in the sense that if you aren't kind of experienced with like the smaller moves in the ocean, these bigger ones might be, a bit difficult to deal with, but we're all still heading in the same place. So I know a lot of you've talked a lot about the lot of changes, the shifting changes and the ingresses in the planets into Aries. You've talked a lot about, this Leo energy, and you've talked a lot about the Saturn Neptune conjunction kind of culminating and beginning a new era. So there's a lot of new energy in 2025 that really is talking about new changes and a lot of new endings, particularly earlier in the year when we had all those planets in Pisces, right? And we still have the nodes in Pisces, so there's still some karma to kind of let go. There's still some chapters to close, but the end of this July has really, I would say brought a lot of finales to a lot of people's lives and is kind of helping begin a new phase with a retrograde, some planets retrograde, before we really move forward with things towards the end of the year. So that's just what we're all feeling collectively. Now, what I have to share with you guys, though, has a lot to do with the market itself and the final market top coming, which might sound a little bit crazy to some of you guys seeing markets at all-time highs now. Some of you guys might think it's already over. Maybe some of you guys thought it was over in March when people were screaming recession. But if you watched the interview that Lada and I did, you knew that Jupiter and Gemini would support markets. And so what we'll do today is talk about Jupiter in Cancer. We'll talk about the coming market top and how that affects everything moving forward. So I've shared my screen there. Lada, can you see that?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So the topics we'll cover today is my overall market thesis, just so you understand where I'm coming from. A lot of these ideas I actually talked about a couple of years ago with one of my first big interviews during, it was the Christmas special, I think, in 2022 with you, Lada, where we talked about how, the Pluto return and how this decade is going to play out for America and the world. So I just want to touch on some of those past and future predictions, talk a little bit about the Orange Man and America's chart and how that all relates to individual assets like gold, silver, crypto, the S&P, and any questions that you, Lada, might have. I know this is being streamed. I don't know if I can see the chat. Maybe if people have questions there, we can look at that. But if not, you guys can just drop those in the comments as well. So past predictions that I've made, I've talked about how I think it was 2022 or 2023, that blood eclipse was going to lead to a shock event in the markets that ended up being the FTX collapse. And during that, I even predicted that would probably be the beginning or the end of that bear market phase, that we would be going into a bull run, right? This is a tweet that I even put out, saying that lunar eclipse really did it. But this might end up being the place to buy. And if you were to look back at the charts and you bought at the end of 2022, crypto was 17K then. Now it's like 120K, right? So we have been in a bull run to move from 17K to 120K. Things have been moving up. And so when I say we're near the end now, I have a little bit of a track record here. I kind of know what I'm talking about, right? So these are, you guys can check out my profiles there where I've made other predictions you guys can look at as well, where I talk about, this was the interview we had last time where that debt crisis would lead to a crash, but not a recession when everyone was screaming recession. I have some posts here on my YouTube channel where I have some other predictions as well. I have a little prediction here about XRP going higher. I'll talk about individual coins later, and, just in the short term as well, too. We're going through a Mercury retrograde right now. The market's gone on pretty hot. I wouldn't be surprised if the first week of August brings some difficulty. We'll talk about the financial astrology behind that. But once the retrograde is over, I would not be surprised if we continue to go even much higher. Okay. So that's just a little bit of, some of the predictions I've made in the past. And just in case you guys haven't watched me and Lada's interviews before, so you can get a little bit of an idea of who I am and where I'm coming from. I've been talking about for the past couple of years to ignore people who are overly bearish because they don't understand the market dynamics. This is a year 2025. The fifth year of every decade is ruled by Venus. Cyclically, they tend to be bullish. I mentioned that the last time I was on. The cycles are a lot more powerful than our short-term emotions, okay? There's not going to be a recession this year because the United States has to print money in order to pay off the debts that were a result of them raising the interest rates very high in 2021. Those bills are due this year. For them to pay them, they need cheap money to do so. It's very simple if you know the mechanics, right? So I talked about how investors throughout the world will be very bullish in the United States. 3 years ago, we've seen that. I talked about gold being at a high in 2024. These are all just old predictions I've made. Now, during that first interview, I shared this larger scope of predictions about how the decade would play out. I'm just showing this for transparency. Not everything here has come true. I'm a human being. I'm not a deity. I'm not going to be right about everything. But there's probabilities in how I make these decisions. And I'm looking at astrology. I'm looking at global cycles. I'm spreading my consciousness as far as we can on the most impactful data points we can find. Right. And so we talked about how the money would flow into the United States. You guys can see the S&P and the stock markets are at an all-time high. This was, again, at the end of 2022 or 2023 when I made these predictions. We talked about weather being an issue, markets being a lot more volatile until we get into 2033. I said 2024 would likely be the last U.S. election. Obviously, that wasn't true. We had a Republican come in for this one. I think it's pretty obvious 2028 will be a Democrat. I'll talk about why that's going to be the case. And then when we get into 2032, we're definitely looking at a new system for the United States, right? So
what do you mean system? Like financial system?
Financial and a governance system overall. So have you ever heard of the phrase, the fourth turning? Is that familiar with you?
No.
This concept of when good times are hard or, hard times make hard people and then the hard people make times easier, then easier times bring hard times. And these tend to be kind of like 20-year chunks, which correlates with Saturn-Jupiter cycles, if you know astrology. But it seems every 20 years we go through those four phases, and we're in that fourth one where hard times kind of have to harden people, and people go through difficulties that end up making the next 60 years better. So if we think back, in the 1940s, 50s, and, when World War II was going on, those were some difficult times that led to a lot of prosperity for the baby boomers and for several decades to come. So you can say that
our babies will have prosperity.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're since 2020, life has not been as, let's say, as easy as it was from like 2000 to 2020, right? So there's some changes that have happened since the pandemic, and there's more to come that we have to deal with that are these difficulties that will set up things to be easier, for our kids and their kids to come. Right. So what happens though during that fourth turn is a change in the system. Okay. So what happened last time is where the dollar got very strong after World War II, all the power got concentrated in the West, and we started to follow a dollar system. So what's likely to happen now during this 20-year period is, and I've made this prediction in that last interview, is power will likely shift to the East, and we might also have a different financial system as well. And so we're already starting to see some of those changes with like the Genius Act in America and Bitcoin now moving into a different phase of something that was mocked, in the 2010s to now being something that is now supporting the United States Treasury and all their debts and all those types of things, which I'll talk about in a bit. So that's how things are shifting throughout, this time period. And so commodities peaking, that must have been a typo. I don't know what I was talking about there. Commodities will not fall into 2028. They will fall in the next bear market, which will be in 2026. And then commodities will continue to go up into the end of the decade because gold and silver and all these metals that go into AI and data centers, Trump just announced he wants to put 500 billion behind AI. He's not the only country that wants to do that. A lot of these countries are now focusing on building internally. So all of these metals are going to be important, not only for industry, but because these countries also want to move away from the dollar. And so that means the oldest form of money, God's money, gold, becomes a lot more interesting to everybody across the world. Right? So commodities have a bright future ahead of them. You know, same thing with the food shortages. We'll probably see more of that throughout the end of the decade. And I'm a firm believer that we are moving into a journey of like this second phase of communism. It's going to have a tech flavor with all this AI stuff that's being built. But I think that that's going to fall apart in 2032, 33, or be fully instituted, depending on what side of the table you're on and who you believe. But I think we're going to come to a conclusion with what's being built in the background by 2032, 33, right? And that's when Saturn will conjoin Uranus, and that's when we'll begin a new, larger, let's say 40-year cycle in the markets where, if you have children or, like where we're doing with all these shocks moving up and down in the market, this is where that sense of stability will come into play, where the markets will start making, much larger moves to the upside for the long term. But between then and 2033, we're going to be dealing with a lot of crashes and ups and downs until things kind of explode. And then we have a reset in terms of who runs the world and what's the new financial system. Okay. So that's the long trajectory. Those are the long predictions and the long thesis I've made. So why is this happening? It's because the world is undergoing a debt crisis. And what does that mean? So how this whole economy world setup works is like we're using the currencies of our governments to pay our bills, right? They print this money in thin air, and of course it's illegal for us to counterfeit money. So why are we going along with this? Not only that, and then they tax us for us to use their money. Like, what if we don't want to use that? Well, you end up like JFK and Lincoln and all these other presidents who tried to move us off this system, right? There's force behind the system. There's military power. There's guns, right? And so that's why we pay our taxes. That's why we use the money of our governments. And it's what makes the systems in each individual countries work. And because America's the top dog, we all kind of use that dollar in a system that works for us now currently, right? So that's why we're using this. But so what a debt crisis means, though, is that all these governments and the money that they've printed, people are not really wanting to pick up that money anymore. America is having, their public beef now with China. China used to buy a lot of United States debt, but they're not doing that anymore, right? And so who's going to buy all this debt? If people aren't buying the debt of these countries, then these countries cannot pay their bills. And if these countries can't pay their bills, then these countries fall apart. And they don't want to do that. So this is why they're doing all this weird shuffling around and weird behavior, is because they have a big problem. They need to pay their bills and they can't. So this is where buying gold comes into play. This is where all this weird stuff with Bitcoin and crypto comes into play. This is why you're hearing the EU talk about how do we get access to more of European savings and force them to invest in the euro market. And maybe we should have a digital euro and use some controls to, you're seeing all these weird manipulations because they're in a crisis. Their governments are falling apart. They have bills to pay and they need to figure this out soon, because if they don't, by the time 2030, 32 comes around, like I'm saying, they're aware of these cycles. The average person is not, but they are. The clock is ticking on them. So they have to put in a control grid. They have to put in, central bank digital currencies to keep things going. Otherwise, somebody else or something else will replace the current system. So that's the issue.
America just voted not to have central bank currencies, but probably it will be something that is like central bank currency. But
I'm going to talk about the Geminian plays there that are at play.
Play of words. They won't call it central currencies, but it will.
Exactly. So why did Donald Trump win? The past 4 years with Sleepy Joe, it's pretty obvious that the Democrats and the people of power were lying to the people about Biden's condition, and the economy wasn't doing that well. And that was by design. because we went through a period of a lot of inflation and Trump giving out checks and people being forced to not work. All of that was bad for the economy and also very inflationary when you have nobody working and you give them a bunch of money to buy services. Like that's a bad combination when people can't.
Hello, Sama? Oh, hello? Did I drop or did? Sorry, I think something is happening. Uh, hello? I'm not sure. We're waiting here. I'm looking at your questions. And do you see me, guys? Do you hear me? Oh, I think he's back.
Yeah,
Oh,
Mercury retrograde, my internet connection's playing some fun games, but we're back. So if people have a lot of money during, or had a lot of money during the past couple of years, that would have been bad for inflation. But America had a bunch of wars to fight and still does, right? So the game plan under the Biden administration was let's pump a lot of money into the war side of the economy, give a bunch of money to Ukraine, let's keep fighting our wars and keep the, American economy and public kind of repressed from not being too abundant. We had a bunch of inflation. We gave them a bunch of money. Let's kind of tamper things down while we fight the war. So that was what the Biden administration was doing. And now with Trump coming in and why Trump won, it was because people weren't very happy with that, right? The idea was Trump's going to come in. Hey, when he was in 2016, things were better. The economy was hot. So that's why people voted for him. And that's part of what the narrative was when Elon came on board and they were instituting Doge. And when I came on in February and said, that's not going to work because I understand the mechanics of the economy, right? And so that's why he won. And how is he doing in terms of that? Well, he tried to institute the tariffs. The market fell. And what did he do? He about faced and said the tariffs were canceled because of how that affected America's debt market and the treasury. That's the most important thing. If America can't pay their debts, then we fall apart. We lose the trust of the globe and the world. And that's the same for every government right now. So that's what I mean. The debt crisis that these governments are dealing with is underlying everything. It's underlying why we're moving into World War III. It's underlying why crypto is going through what it's going through and a lot of the predictions that I'm making. So he about faced, right? And instead of them cutting the United States budget, what we're seeing now is a money printing bill got passed.
oh,
So about faced, very Geminian, right? He says one thing and he does another. And so that's a lot of what a lot of what we're experiencing with this presidency is, you know, a lot of, there's really two social classes in America, okay? Sure, there's racism. Sure, there's a middle class. Sure, there's this ism, that ism, different regions, different politics or whatever. But beneath all that, there's two social classes, okay? There's those that work for money and those who own assets whose money works to make them money. All right. So Trump is of the second class. He doesn't work a job. His money doesn't come from labor. His money comes from money. Okay. And so personally, when I quit my job during the Saturn Jupiter conjunction in 2020, I made a commitment to learn how to make that transition myself, right? To be someone whose money worked to provide for his lifestyle. When people in the second class have political power, which is basically all the time, they vote for and put in policies and government subsidies that support their money growing more money. And so that's all we've seen. And so this bill that he's passed is going to do more of that. So the 1% are going to get even richer, and the 99% whose money comes from going to work, your lives get even harder over the next 4 years. And that was even the case during 2016 to 2020. You guys just didn't see it that way because the markets were going up. You guys thought, oh, a Trump presidency is good for you guys. So a lot of the economic actions he's doing, very Geminian, they're canceling each other out. Like you said, oh, he passed the CBDC Act, no CBDC Act, but he also passed the Genius Act, which is using Bitcoin and stable coins as America's CBDC. So he's talking out of one side of his mouth saying there's no CBDCs, but what he's doing with another act is the same thing, but in different language. He's done a lot of things like this, right? Where it would be a benefit to the poor, maybe that expense is being removed and it's replaced by a policy that's supporting the 1%. Like the tariffs are not on AI companies or supercomputers. The tariffs on, things like lumber, things like wood and steel and materials, things that people who work in construction would be affected by, right? So this is what's going on here. And one of the interesting things about tariffs is how it leads to this inventory and control plan. Very Geminian stuff here going on. Okay, there's a researcher, what's his name? Greg Reese, his name is, where he talked about this. He actually exposed that what Trump is actually giving countries an out for with the tariffs is, okay, if you don't want to pay the tariffs, then I want your biometric data of your citizens. Why does America need the biometric data of citizens of other countries? It's very odd, right? And it seems like maybe Mexico might be going along with this. So where what that would look like is then these countries that agree to this would have a digital ID, right? And they would have like a social security system similar to America, and it would include fingerprints and eye scanning. So why does America need to accumulate this data from different countries? Those aren't our citizens, right? That's a clear tell that Trump is working for somebody behind him who wants to build a control grid. Right. And these goes to topics we talked about before and how all this AI stuff is leading to this Agenda 2030 thing that they're trying to push for. And they have to get it complete. Otherwise, they lose their control. All right. So he's not who the public thinks he is. It's just a very Geminian play going on. And a lot of people are falling for that. And I think during this Mercury retrograde, there's some stuff with supposedly Jeffrey Epstein's best friend, that are now coming up to where people's perception of him might be changing. We'll see. It's going to be pretty interesting how that plays out. But this presidency is going to lead to, again, people getting richer who are rich already. It's going to lead more to like a battle of different AIs from do people now start investing more in China and their products? Or does the tech supremacy stay with the United States? Because right now we have lost a lot of that grip or that separation from America being the main tech giant to now China's actually catching up. So that battle is going to continue over the next 4-8 years, and we might see people across the world now having more interest in Chinese companies. We'll see how that plans out. And of course, now with why he won, if the public don't get that, right? If the poor don't get richer, they don't get the abundance they thought they would get under a Trump presidency, we will see things swing all the way again to the left. And we'll see a lot of maps being blue in 2028, probably a Democratic president who then puts in, these socialistic, communistic, kind of very rigid technocratic policies in an America that will probably kind of fall apart and lead to a different reset of how America is ran, right? Which goes back to that earlier prediction I made of like this journey into communism won't last. Okay. And so what they're trying to push for is this a digital identity ecosystem, right? To have a bank account, to be able to travel, to be able to go into the grocery store, to be able to log in online, to be able to use the phone, to get healthcare, right? The whole vaccine passport thing, all these things, like that was Trump. That was Mr. Warp Speed, who was on TV saying, don't believe in the virus, it's not real. But he's also the same guy saying, I passed it. I'm the reason the jabs came through. I'm Mr. Warp Speed. A lot of Geminian doublespeak. He'll just say what he needs to say, right? But this is what they're pushing for.
I think that no matter who is the president, in which country, everywhere, someone behind everyone else is pushing them. And they would never be allowed to become a president if they were not following this plan. So,
yeah, it's a very weird job. It's not one I would want. No. Trump has done things like remove America from the WHO and a lot of positive things too, right? So don't think I'm just here bashing him. I'm not politically biased toward any side. I don't even really vote, which is why I feel the leeway to bash each side equally as I see fit. I think these parties work together to play us, honestly.
Yes.
You could say a lot of what Biden was doing with immigration was to set Trump up to do what he's doing now with IDs and to push things forward.
Mhm,
Who
mhm.
knows? I don't know.
Everyone who was against what the Democrats were doing,
Hmm.
and they were like, "Oh, we'll never do this,"
Yeah,
IDs, and now they're calling for this.
exactly. Yeah. So, there's footage of Trump saying that he was a Democrat. There's footage of him saying, I'm a Republican. It's so Geminian, it's hilarious. But I would be very careful just trusting what any politician says, period. You know. So how this leads to markets, and like I said, and where people can see a lot of them are at all-time highs. I believe we are at a point where we'll see things come down during eclipse season this September or so. And then things push a lot higher into what we see here being an euphoria phase where people feel like they're missing out on the markets pushing a lot higher. And that is a very dangerous time, especially for people who are inexperienced with markets, because that looks like you're buying the top. That looks like Wall Street is about to exit and all these retail participants are entering, and then the elevator just crashes to zero, basically. And so that's why I want to kind of issue a warning and kind of a reminder of what I said earlier this year. These waves are going to get very extreme. If you're not experienced, you can lose a lot of money. Some of you will make more money than you've ever made in your entire lives over this next time period. And if you've checked out my yearly report, I've actually made some amendments to it where with the most recent information we have up to date and my thoughts on the market right now are in it. So I can really help you guys get positioned for this ending phase of the market. Because as you saw in that image, this ending phase of the market is where a lot of the money is made and lost, right? So we're going to go basically
What is
from
this
this.
timing? The big going down. I think the high up will be the Saturn Jupiter trine in October,
Exactly.
in December, because they're holding it all the time.
You're
And
exactly right. I agree with that. I talk about that in my yearly report. Saturn is structure, Jupiter is expansion. When these two planets are working together, we're talking about companies which have a lot to do with the structure of society, whether it's utilities, the electrical grid, business, how we relate, the government itself, who prints the currencies. That structure is being supported by the planet of expansion. So the end of this year very likely to be very abundant, but how do you navigate that? How long is that going to last? How is that going to affect different sectors of the market? Because they're not all going to be up at the same time, you know. And what does that look like in terms of how you rotate capital? These are some of the things we touch into in that yearly report, or things that we can talk about as it relates to your individual chart in a one-on-one session if people are interested in that. But I definitely agree that's going to be a very abundant time period. So all of these analysts who earlier this year were saying a recession's going to come, clearly they don't know financial astrology, right? Lada's not a Wall Street expert, but even with what she just said right there, right? That is more likely to play out than what people have no idea about markets and are just panicking or talking about. And a very abundant time period is coming to the markets. And cyclically, what you're seeing in this image, this happens about every 4 years, this business cycle. So if you get this wrong, you're going to have to wait about 4 years for this kind of euphoric phase where a lot of this money is made to come back around. Okay. So just keep that in mind. Now we have America's chart here. And we got some transits going on here. Jupiter has moved, Jupiter, the planet of expansion, which here this bent four symbol, for those of you who are new to astrology here, is in America's, this is America's chart, the Sibley chart, the chart made for America at the time of the independence, the Independence Day. Jupiter has moved from the sign of market Gemini, which is why I said there won't be a recession, now to the eighth house. And the eighth house has a lot to do with vitality, markets, money from, let's say, places we don't earn from, let's say, the second house by our own hands. This is more of energy that we're exchanging with others. And that is why astrologers, as well as financial astrologers, look at the eighth house as it relates to things like big market moves, especially as it relates to charts of countries. Okay. And so with Jupiter in the eighth house, the planet of expansion, going into joint finances, you put those two together and the sentence becomes the expansion of joint finances, quite literally, right? So these joint finances, what are America's joint finances? We're talking about debts, we're talking about stock markets, we're talking about America's currencies. And Cancer has a lot to do with real estate and property as well. So for those of you who live in the States and you're curious about what's going to happen with property, we're probably going to see the supply of houses increase, which means there's going to be more homes on the market. That may bring prices down if you're looking at that. What this will also likely do is, and you can see Trump screaming about this on Twitter if you're interested, is he wants to push interest rates down, which will make homes easier or cheaper to buy. That might in some areas increase the home prices if there's not new homes being built in that area. So real estate is very location specific, depending on where you are in the world. Okay. So Jupiter in the eighth house will basically increase the housing supply. It may make the ability for Americans to buy homes a little bit easier while this transit is occurring. Jupiter is going to be here for about a year. All right. If you bought a home when rates were high and you want to refinance, it's probably a good time to do that. All right. I'm actually in that position. I'm going to be looking at refinancing probably in Q1 of next year because I think we will have had a few rate cuts at that point. And so with where rates are headed in the future, they will be much higher. And so I think that while Jupiter is in Cancer, if you want to be able to lock in a lower interest rate, that's something you might want to take very seriously in 2026 because
So
rates are
they're going to lower the rates for sure.
Yeah, that's what he wants. He wants to lower the rates. And what lower rates typically does for markets is it pushes them higher, right? And that's what we're talking about, the expansion of joint finances here in the eighth house. This speaks to more abundance in financial markets, okay? Not only just housing with the Cancer aspect, but because this is joint finances, because this is loans, this is real estate, and this is markets, Jupiter will expand the nurturing and the security of these things. Banks will be more willing to lend, people's ability to increase debts, which is from the Federal Reserve aspect, printing more money. These things will be the case, right? Yeah. So we also have Uranus entering Gemini, right? In the seventh. That speaks to innovation and business partnerships. How are companies going to integrate AI more into their businesses, which is going to, I think, that's going to lead to a bear market next year because typically when rates are cut, that cheaper money is used by companies to do more hiring, right? To bring people back into the workforce to help jumpstart the economy when it's sluggish. But now we have AI. And I can tell you from the CEOs I work with and what I've seen over the past year is people are really trying to figure out how to incorporate AI and not hire back because AI doesn't have a healthcare cost. AI is not going to go to HR for whatever reason. AI can work while you're asleep. So this is a trend with Uranus and Gemini that's affecting employment in ways we haven't seen before. Like we said earlier, Saturn-Neptune conjunction, Pluto and Aquarius. This is a new era, guys. So a lot of the old tricks don't work the way they used to, which is why in 2032 and 33, we're going to lead to a new whole global reset. So hopefully you guys are seeing why these different predictions are coming together the way that they do. I might not be right about these things, but at least you guys get the thinking or get the logic, right? You get how the astrological cycles are coming to play. We've never lived through this, so I'm not going to be right about everything, but we're seeing how the different flavor of what, astrologers before us, what Lada has predicted, we're seeing how these things are coming together and they're giving us hints of what's coming in the future, right? So America has some challenges. Unexpected changes with agreements. Gemini is agreements, right? Digital communication ventures will expand. Financial opportunities will come through things like AI, media, writing, trade agreements, international relations. Uranus is disruption. So there will be disruption in traditional models of finance, right? Bitcoin becomes more important. And then Bitcoin maybe gets disrupted. Maybe there's hacking. There won't be a smooth ride with AI and how we deal with markets and legal agreements, right? And then when September comes, we have eclipse season. So now let's get into individual asset predictions and how I think, the next 2 months will play out. And if you want to know how I think the whole rest of this run will play out again, check out my financial astrology investment selections report, which,
I've attached it below in the description for anyone who would like to have that one
yeah.
to benefit from the big bull run at the end of
Mhm.
the year.
Yeah. And we'll offer that as a discount too, so that if you guys were thinking about getting it or you're just getting introduced to this, that can help you because it really makes sense to get your affairs in order if you're going to do so during this Mercury retrograde.
What should I put it at discount? I'm gonna do it as we speak. Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm gonna.
so let's give people $70 off, right?
All right.
Let's do that. Yeah. So, yeah, if you want to know what happens after eclipse season, you guys can check that out, right? But there will be very likely a war panic that ends this bull run sometime next year, but what we're talking about, as you guys saw in that chart earlier here, this will be a very kind of once in a lifetime kind of rally that leads to a kind of 1 year, maybe even 18-month bear market. But if you've been patiently waiting to make big money, right, this is kind of the point in the cycle where that occurs. So I'm even saying, with confidence, you guys, that if Bitcoin doesn't go to, let's say, 170K before the end of the year, I'll even go ahead and delete my account. All right, that's how sure I am about Venus being the fifth year, things performing well. The first week of August is very likely to have some difficulty because of the aspects, a Venus square to Saturn. But after that, Venus is going to be in the sign of Leo with Mercury. Leo has a lot to do with speculation and trade. So does Mercury. Mercury is a planet of trade and commerce in the side of Leo, which rules speculation and markets, hobbies and romance. This is the energy of taking a bet. This is the energy of taking a risk. This is the energy of taking a chance, And so this is where we might see Bitcoin making 10K moves in a day during that time period, But I would say even when Venus joins Mercury in September, that could be a very abundant time to, let's say, take profits. That might be a turn in the cycle, actually, where we see things starting to actually pull back for a little bit. And people might think that, oh, this bull run is over. They might start panicking. That goes into where I even circled this, where the market even starts to pull back and people think it's over. I'm thinking that's this September where things pivot. Okay. And that's eclipse season. Okay. And so we're talking about eclipse season activity where a shocking drop in the market is very likely to happen. Eclipse season can do that, and like I'm saying, with even the aspects too in the first week.
Like in March, it dropped so much.
Exactly. Just like in March, where people freaked out and they thought it was all over. I think we'll see that again in September, where people saying, "Oh, this is it. The S&P's at a high. Bitcoin went to 120 or 130. That's it. It's over. Sell it all," kind of a thing. But I don't agree with that. I think we will push much higher after that. And if you want to know where and how much and the timing of that, again, you can check out that report. Okay.
Oh,
But
second, people asking what about altcoins, their season?
sure, yeah, let's dive into altcoins. So basically everything goes up. Altcoins will go crazy. I'm gonna do a separate video on this. If you guys are curious what this move here is, I'll dive into that in that video. But that's how high I think the total altcoin market is going. So your XRPs, your Solana, your Ethereums, your BNB, your meme coins, the doggy coins, the frog coins, all of that eventually, like I'll even share, that time period you mentioned when Saturn's trine Jupiter. I believe all markets will be in the midst of a sugar rush. More details in the report, but this is going to be a time period of abundance coming on the way with altcoins, I would say. And so, look, again, a lot of this has to do with the control grid that they have to build. They need a lot of money to do that. What I want you guys to do is, now that you know the game, is to use that money to use it for what you want your future to look like by 2030, right? If you don't want to be a part of that control grid, start having conversations with your families and looking at your chart, reach out to different astrologers to understand what your future trajectory is headed towards. And if you profit off of this bull run, use that money to support, your future and your vision, right? But you need to take care of taking profits towards this time period and not being, let's say, too excited about what other market participants who have been telling you, oh, a recession's coming. When this happens, they'll flip bullish, and they'll say things are going much higher. This is really a time period where you guys should be exiting and really being prepared for what you're going to do next in terms of where things progress towards this 2030 stuff, right? Like where do you want to be as America gets more socialistic? Where do you want to be as we head towards countries getting more, militaristic, AI being more of a thing, them pushing more for things like digital ID, there being more of a global conflict. I want you guys to keep these larger cycles in mind and not be so zoomed into what's happening on the day to day, because that's how people get suckered. All right. So while your altcoins will go up, don't get lost in that. Make sure you're taking profits in that and being able to use those profits for what matters. And like I've been saying before, the things to invest in with your money during this whole phase as things transition over, if you're not invested in the United States, whether that's the United States stock market, your local currencies are going to have issues. So that is why the United States stock market is of interest. And that is why gold and Bitcoin are of interest. There are some concerns with Bitcoin because of quantum computing, which I've talked about. That is a risk, right? We talked about how Uranus and Gemini will bring volatility. People will try to hack Bitcoin. Even governments might try to manipulate Bitcoin or even change how much is printed. I know you guys think that's impossible, but some weird stuff can happen over the next 8 years with Bitcoin and with crypto, right? Some weird things can happen with your local currencies. I mentioned how the euro will probably be one of the first major first world currencies to collapse because of what they'll try to do with the digital euro. So if you hold euros, be careful. Maybe look at gold, maybe look at some crypto, maybe look at some US stocks. Really think about, if you only have currencies, local currencies, what can I move some of this in? Because again, this debt crisis is a currency crisis. It's a crisis in the governments and the money they print. And so we all work for these currencies. You don't want the money you work for to just go down the drain. So while all your stuff will go up, all your alts and cryptos and all those things will go up soon, please keep in mind the larger picture of what I'm sharing with you guys. And of course, the yearly report dives into that. You can join my newsletter where I keep people up to date on how these larger things are playing out. Let me just pull that up. Yep. So bear market's coming next year. Timing. And this goes into the reason I put this image up here is because if you remember what happened from 2020 to 2021 is the markets went crazy. They went absolutely crazy. Inflation got really hot. And because inflation got hot, they had to raise the rates, and that was the end of the party. That's how the party always ends. And so when a party ends that way, household net worth, as you can see, after all that money got pumped in the markets and people thought they were rich and they didn't take profits, all that money then got lost in 2022 with the Scorpio eclipse and the beginning of the war. All right. So that's what I'm saying is coming in 2026 is eclipses will come, a war or maybe a cyber attack, something like that. Some global event will likely occur. Markets will go down. And if you haven't taken your exits or made some money this year in 2025, well, you might watch it all go down the way people did in 2022. So if you want help timing that, check out the updated yearly report. We took off $70 for you guys. Lada will have the link down below. And again, you guys can check me out on my my newsletter here. And that's where I share free stuff in terms of how I see things progressing as well. So there you go. That's
Thank
it,
you.
guys.
And one last question. Jupiter in Cancer.
Yes,
Do you think silver will go up because Cancer is rules silver, doesn't it?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, silver will go up as well. Silver is a very key metal. And where I think silver's big day will come is around 2028, 29, 2030. It doesn't mean you don't invest in silver now. You definitely can. Because like you guys saw, basically everything will go up as we go into this Saturn Jupiter trine. But where we will see silver doing really big numbers is in the next cycle that's coming. All right. So central banks and governments have a huge interest in gold this time around. Silver is going to be much more of a darling next cycle, but that doesn't mean to ignore silver now. Silver will definitely be going up as well, for sure.
Thank
Any
you
other
so much,
questions?
Emma.
Any? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I clicked away from the questions, but I remember those and I asked you.
Sure,
So
sure.
thank you so much again. I'm putting a link below if you want to contact Sama. And yeah, we're looking forward for this big top of the market. Won't that make prices higher for everyone?
It
Still.
will. It will. It'll make them higher, and people should take advantage of them because it won't last forever. And that's really the key message is ignore the bears and the negativity. A lot of money is on the table to be made. I wish you all luck and success in making that money. We can again look at your individual charts. I've looked at mine. I'll even share. It looks like a bunch of money is coming my way around September, October, which is again correlating with there being kind of a high in that time period. And then there's kind of another wave later on. I touch into that in the report update that I share with you guys if you're interested in that. So yeah, things will be going up. Take advantage of it, you guys. I'm wishing you all abundance and good luck with this stuff because again, there will be times in the future where things will get a bit harder. So that's why this message is coming out now. You know, make the best of the markets going up while you can, because that's what Trump and the wealthy will be doing, and then the party will stop, just like it did in 2021 to 22. So you've been warned. Don't mess it up.
Incredible insights. Thank you everyone for joining us live or watching the recording after that.